Yeah. All right, I can't be in person yet, but someday. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Can I see who's here? Or? Oh, the quiet room. There they are, all hanging out there. Hi. All right. So should we go?
Yes.
All right. So I'm gonna do a talk. It'll probably take 25 minutes or 30 minutes, and then we'll talk. Is that right?
Yes. Perfect.
All right. And we figured this out yesterday, so let me make sure that we do it right. And if it's right, we'll go from there. We're gonna share screens, and I'm gonna share a window. I'm gonna share this one. Let's see what happens. So can you see me?
Yes.
Can you see the slides?
White.
Yes? You see slides?
Okay,
Okay.
ready.
Now you are.
So you can see the title slide and everything. The book cover? Yes, sorry, I can't hear you.
Yes.
Oh, okay. And you hear me well, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna stop shouting now. I'll just talk normal. You stop me if something goes wrong, because I can't tell. Okay, well first, thanks so much for having me, and I'm glad to meet you all in whatever way we're meeting across the internet. But today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what unflattening is, what I meant by it, some stuff about how I use comics, and a little bit about my process and how that process ties into the larger idea. So I want to start with just a quick thing. I was a comics guy from from a very young age. I'm one of those people whose first word was Batman, and I made my own comic all the way through high school. Let's see if this clicks. And I was really into it, and I really liked making comics. But when I went to school, and I don't know what this is like now where you are, but when I went to school, making comics in school was not like an intellectual activity. It was something we kind of always did on the side. So I studied mathematics, and comics really fell to there were things I just did when I had time every once in a while. So it was kind of rare. And I think I'm glad I studied mathematics, but I feel like we've come a long ways. Maybe that's the biggest point. We've come a long ways to now understanding that you can actually do a lot of your thinking in comics form and in visual forms, and that's a big part of my talk. So I've got, hold on one second, my computer's frozen for some reason. But I'll say, so it stayed in the background for a long time, and I'll move slides as soon as it unfreezes. And I spent a lot of time in Detroit as a young adult running a magazine about the arts there. And during that time, I was asked to be in an art show around the 2004 U.S. Presidential election. And I came back to making comics for that, as I didn't have a lot of time. And I made a comic that was about voting, and it was very much using visual and verbal metaphor to get my point across. And so that sort of launched me back into making comics. And then shortly after that, I made a comic. We put on an exhibition of games and art, and I made the essay in comics form. And this is just one page from it. But I was using pop culture images. I was using visual metaphors. I was using all these different things to do complex ideas in a way that's accessible and sort of might seem simple, but was really quite dense. So when I decided to come back and get my doctorate, it was this kind of work I showed them to say, I can do really sophisticated work in comics, and I can do work that speaks both to academics and to people that haven't been in school, because I was really concerned with bridging the gap between academia and the sort of broader public sphere. So the minute I got to school, I started making comics for all my work, partly because that's what I wanted to do, and partly it was a way to sort of teach my professors what this meant, how to do it. And so this is a very early work as a doctoral student, This was about my professor, Maxine Green, who's a very famous philosopher of aesthetic education. Really wonderful person, and this comic's on my website. And shortly after, this is one more before the dissertation. So it was a comic about narrative research, and I made this comic that is either about doing research, or drawing, or about how we see. And it really depended on who was reading it, what they thought it was about. And that's something that's, besides visual metaphor, this idea that I can make comics that appear to be about many things at the same time has been a real character of my work. That I really like to have things that can be read in many different ways so that they can invite many different audiences. So with that little setup, I'll tell you about unflattening. As the slides click. So unflattening it's pushing back against something I identified as flatness. And flatness is not a literal condition, but sort of a narrowness of our thinking. It's being locked into patterns of one-dimensional thought and behavior where you're not really able to think about possibilities outside of the paths you're already on. And so because I had this word unflattening from how I thought about comics, and I'll say that later, I decided to use Edwin Abbott's 1880s novella Flatland as a metaphor. Are you guys familiar with that? Some of you? Anybody familiar with Flatland? I got one nod in the front. Well, it doesn't matter. So basically, Flatland is a story about the geometric inhabitants of this two-dimensional world. So they're circles, they're squares, they're lines, they're triangles, and they know how to move east and west and south and northwards, but they have no ability to go upwards. They can't conceive of things that are off this flat plane that they all live on. So the point was, like, you and I can look at flatlanders and say, that's kind of silly. We can look down on them and say, well, of course there's other dimensions. But the question for us is, what is upwards for you and I? What are the directions, what are the ways we can't think about because our seeing is limited? And so I was trying to ask this much more metaphorical question: how do we get out of the narrowness of our own thinking? And for me, and I don't know anything about the education system where you are, but in the United States, I feel like so much around testing and standardized assessment and all these things, I think our education system fosters a kind of flatness. There's like a series of steps you go through. There's a recipe that you have to follow. And ultimately that ends up putting us in boxes. So we put our learning in boxes, whether it's how much time, you have your subject lasts from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, whether it's boxes of the subject itself, like if you study mathematics, you probably don't study art. And whether it's the boxes of space. We're in classrooms that are, not necessarily reflective of how we learn. So I feel like we internalize those boxes and start to think that they're real. We start to think that if I, again, to use math and art, if I'm somebody who does mathematics, I'm not really I shouldn't be into art. And so we draw these, what I think are very artificial boxes around ourselves, and at the limit of who we are, and they narrow who we can be. And I think that's the thing I want to push against, is sort of lining up our thinking in rows and rows. And because I was in the academy doing a doctorate, and here goes the slide, I was very specifically pushing back against the scholarship as rows and rows and rows of text. So why is it, and I assume it's the same there, that 12-point type, double-spaced, 1.5 by 1 by 1 by 1 inch margins are what scholarship is supposed to look like? And I think we can look back as far as say Plato, who saw images as shadows of shadows, so you couldn't trust them. And we can look at Descartes, who said you can't trust the senses at all. And so, we're best thinking of ourselves as thinking machines. So obviously we've gained a lot by using those models that they set up, but we've also maybe forgotten how much the body, how much our movement, how much our visual system is part of how we learn. So I think about it like this: anytime we try to represent the complexity of our experience, we have no choice but to flatten it in some way. So you all know, I assume, the upper picture here is the Mercator projection, which is how you normally see a map of the world. And that's a really good map if you want to navigate the oceans, but it also distorts things. So things like circled up there, Greenland is nowhere near that big compared to other things. But the map flattens it out in such a way to distort it. And you can look in the middle image here, which is Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion map, where he takes the globe and he pushes it onto an icosahedron, and then after he's done that, he unfurls it. So his map shows all the continents connected, unlike the other map, which shows east and west very much divided. And I'm not going to claim that that one is more accurate. It's to say that each one is showing you different information, and each one is leaving things out in the way that if we ask what the temperature is, anytime you leave out, anytime you ask about the weather, if all you tell me is the temperature, you're leaving out the sunlight, you're leaving out the wind, you're leaving out humidity, all those other factors that play a role. So the big question in this work is, what are we missing when we only count one mode of thinking as legitimate? And what might we start to make visible when we introduce images, when we introduce other ways people make sense of the world? So I have this page about my dog, and it's partly because I talk about ways of seeing in the book, but by ways of seeing, I really mean more broadly ways of knowing. And so the dog's example is we all know the dog sense of smell is stronger than yours and mine, right? You nod or something so I can see you. We all know it's stronger, but what's really true about the dog's sense of smell is that it's more nuanced, which means the dog comes into the room you guys are in, and where I can see kind of gray or white tables and I see black chairs, the dog comes in and it knows maybe who sat in that empty chair in the front row this morning, and maybe who was there yesterday, and maybe back 7 whole days of time the dog knows about who came to that chair because its senses are that way. So I see that as having access to layers of time, a way of getting out of the ways of knowing that I have. That's something I think we need to think about privileging as teachers and as learners. Like, how do we bring in those other ways of knowing? And so, very simply, unflattening, you all hold up, your finger in front of your eye and you look at it with one eye closed and you close the other one. They're different views, and there's no one view that's correct, but it's when you come from both views that you start to have a more dimensional sense of the world. So unflattening is this very simple metaphor that when we start to bring in other modes, we start to get a different sense of the world, a better dimensional sense of the world. And it doesn't have to just be 2, it can be many, many modes. And so for me, comics was this thing that I love to do, but it's also this way that I could breathe in the worlds of both image and text, and maybe sort of get a sense of the boundaries that I'm restricted in, and maybe learn to step out and see them from a very different perspective. So that's kind of what it's about. But like I said at the setup, that it's kind of about whatever you think it's about. And that answer changes depending on who I talk to. So from here, I want to talk a little bit about how I use comics and how I think about them, and that ties back into the bigger idea. So at the risk of trying this, can I ask you guys a question? Yes, I can. So what's the difference between comics and graphic novels? I don't know if that has a meaning, if those words have as much meaning there or not, but well, yeah. Huh, that's okay. I didn't mean to stop for that long. Sorry. Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you. Yeah. So we'd use the word, we would say one is serial and one is sort of its own thing. And I think there's truth to that, but there's also, it doesn't really matter. What I want to say about it is that graphic novel, at least in the United States, and has been a very effective marketing term. So in the past, our perceptions of comics have been that they're things for kids, they're superheroes. So I think in calling them graphic novels, it sort of made it the grown-up thing that other people, that some people accept. I still use the word comics, but my book has a big spine on it. So people like to call it, I don't know if you can see me, but they like to say, this is a graphic novel. But the work I make is the same as people made comics 100 years ago in terms of my craft. So anyway, just to dispense that, what I want to say is that comics are kind of seen as a new medium. We're talking about them in college, but they're actually older than film. And I think what's most important about them is that they're extending a lineage way back into how we made sense of the world. As things click here, how we made sense of the world in images that is as old as we are, as old as humans are. And I've got a frozen computer here. There we go. So my point is that this literacy, this needing to make sense of the world in images, is as old as we are. And it's one that I'm afraid that we've sort of forgotten for a while. We've forgotten in favor of text. And not to say anything wrong with text, it's only to say, what happens when we sort of privilege this again? When we say, even if you're not going to be a fine artist, you can use these kind of modes. So I want to say a little bit about how comics work, and my computer is acting very funny, so hopefully we can keep going. So in 1993, this man named Scott McCloud, whose avatar is pictured up there, he produced a book called Understanding Comics, which is it was a comic about comics, and very influential in terms of comics in education, in terms of my own work, because this was like talking about ideas rather than superheroes, rather than funny animals or horror stories. This was just about ideas. And his definition of comics is written up there: juxtapose pictorial and other images in deliberate sequence. So basically, and I don't know how well you can see me, but I'll try to talk it through. If I draw my fist and I put a box around it, and then in another box I put my fist and I've extended my arm, nothing happens. Comics are flat, they're static, nothing moves. But the reader animates that. You take one picture here and you take the next one and you make something happen in between. Okay, so the flat thing, and that's one way we think about time. Like you go from this moment to the next and you stitch those together. Okay, so that's a good starting point for comics. But the other thing, and this is from the book, yes, you can read this sequentially, left to right, top to bottom, but because you take it in all at once, you see the whole image all at once, you start to make connections from the lower right back up to the upper left, and in various directions. And in fact, within any individual panel, maybe you read the text first, maybe you read the image first, or maybe you read both, you keep alternating back and forth. So you're both reading sequentially like text, but also all at once like you look at a picture. So two kinds of ways of thinking are going on at once, and two ways of thinking about time are going on at once. So this, if things are working here, this is a panel from the famous comic Watchmen. And in the center, I think he's talking a lot about how comics work. And this character says, there is no future, there is no past. Do you see? So basically saying in the upper left, yes, that comes first in how you read it. The lower right comes last. But the lower right takes place 30 years before the upper left. But they're both visible on the same space. So time and space are kind of mashed up in a funny way. So how I think about this is, if we think about how our brains work, one part of our brain is sort of devoted to focusing on linear activity. You go from here to here, and it sort of keeps track of things. And the other part is devoted to how all at once. So you're kind of aware of everything around you. And you can think about it today. Today you're at this class now, and in half an hour you're going to go to your next class or your next thing, and the day sort of goes like this. So you're going in time very linearly. But your thoughts right now, something I've said maybe makes you think about something that's off here, or maybe you're anticipating something you're doing later. So even as you're walking linearly through time, the thoughts are kind of adrift and all over. And I think comics do this really neat thing where you can be both linear and also have this all at once going on. So let me give you a few examples. My mouse is still sleeping here. So this is from a French comic about the Louvre, and I don't know how well you can see it, but if you were to cut it up into 9 panels, and I showed you them one at a time, you would miss something. You would miss that there's this triangle in the background, which is actually representing the pyramid. You would miss that the whole page has a drawing going on it. So there's both individual sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 panels, but there's the whole page doing something. So on a similar note, this is Gasoline Alley, an American comic or U.S. comic from the 1930s. And you can see the character is bumbling through sequentially. He's walking sequentially through it. But yet it's all taking place in one scene. There's 2 kinds of ways going on at the same time. So one more here. So this is a joke. So when you guys laugh, I'll talk about it. You can only see me? Has that been true for a while? Wait, you see it all? Oh, all right. Because if it wasn't, all right. So basically, this little guy, the only way the little guy, and now you get it? Okay, the only way you can see what this little guy, the only way he can get the fruit is because he lives in a comic book where he can walk backwards in space and also connect moments in time. So comics do this really unusual mashup of time and space, which allows for some really interesting ways to compose our ideas. So this is a page back from Unflattening, and I was basically contrasting my wife's commute, which was all over the city and very different every day, with somebody's typical commute where they go out and they come back and they go out and they come back and they do the same thing every day. And so you could just illustrate it. You could say, here's one and here's the other. But I'm particularly interested in how the comic space, the very space of it, can visually embody the ideas. So if you see in the background, and I'm trusting that you can see the whole thing there. In the background, the grid, the panels, they do the same thing. They're repeated over and over and over again. And then in the foreground, this shape of Manhattan drifts across the page the way that my wife's commute drifted. So there's like many layers of reality going on at the same time, but because you can take it all in visually, you can gauge it at your own pace and you make the connection. So this sort of sequential and simultaneous is happening. And so it really allows for some different reading ways altogether. So this is not in the book. This is from a piece I did for a newspaper here. And it's about entropy, so it doesn't really matter. But if you were to read this piece, the very top is very linear. You like read across. And then I want to talk about how sometimes things go back, they go backwards or back upstream. And so actually this comic, after you've read the first 2 rows, you read down a little bit, the word yet pushes you to the right, and then you read down the spiral, and just for a second you read right to left, which we never do, right? We don't read right to left. And then you read bottom to top. So it's actually asking you to read in different directions. And I think that question, like how you change your thinking by asking you to change how you read, is a really important one. And I won't dwell on this. There's some slides of how this is all on my website. You don't need to see it now. But there's an enormous amount of thinking into how I get you to experience the idea. So for me, this all comes down to this question: is what do our thoughts look like? And I think this is something we should ask ourselves. What do our thoughts look like before we put them down on paper, before we say them out loud? And I speculate that, I don't think anybody is going to say they're rows and rows of text. I ask this question a lot. Sometimes people say spaghetti. Sometimes people say lots of pictures. Sometimes people say videos. I mean, they give me all these different answers, but nobody ever says they look like lines of text. And I think comics do this kind of neat thing. This is from the cartoonist Chris Ware, where they can capture the sort of forward motion of your life, but also those tangents that are your thinking, the memories, the anticipated moments. So I think comics are a really powerful tool to represent the complexity of your thoughts. But what I want to close with is that I think they're a really important and powerful tool to generate your thinking. And that's what so slides are working here. Here we go. So your eyes, every second your eyes are darting about, and they're making relationships. They're like looking, if this man is in front of that table, I'm looking at all these different things, and my eyes are making relationships. And so when I make a mark on a piece of paper, all of a sudden this relationship engine starts to see things into it that I didn't expect. So I think about my own work as a way of having a conversation with myself. In the act of drawing, the act of making marks, I start to discover things that I didn't even mean to discover. And that this drawing is really a process of discovery. So people ask me, did you think of the words first or the pictures? And I say yes. Because it's, I'm putting, you can see it on the left side here. I put words down, I put pictures down, and I'm like trying to figure out how they connect. And it's the act of me looking, I start to see new things. I start to discover things about where I want to go and where I need to go. And so this is the very first sketch I made to like figure out the whole book. And I like to share it. I like to share a lot of this process sketches because I think to people who don't make art or don't play music, when you see a finished work, it looks like magic. And you think like, well, it just came right out of their head and they just are really smart or really whatever. But the truth is, it's this process of play. It's this process of making things, making mistakes, making accidental discoveries. And I think that's something we all can do. And I think when you see it like this, it starts to open it up. And I think the other thing that's important about this sketch is to say it's not a picture of my thinking. This is my thinking. So without making these sketches, without making these notes, this work doesn't exist. It only exists because I'm having this interaction with the drawing, and the drawing is teaching me where to go. So I want to give you one very specific example of that. In the 5th chapter, which is on imagination, I wanted to have a page about the transformative power of stories. And I thought very early on that I would do something with Scheherazade, which I'm guessing the 1001 Arabian Nights tales. I'm sure it's called something, I don't know what it's called, but that's, so I wanted to play with the way that she would tell stories that had stories within stories. And so I started playing with it, and I had this idea that each panel would refer to the panel before, like you can see the magic carpet, now he's in the background, now we're going into this room. So I was playing with that. But what I wanted to say in the middle of the page is that by stories, I didn't simply mean the fanciful or the fantastic, but I also meant things like science, the sort of ways, the stories we tell about how the world works that help us figure it out. So if I was writing, I probably would have just said, I also mean things like science and put a period. But because I want to figure out how to visually embody that, I had to find something in science that spoke to the idea, that spoke to the time that the Arabian Nights tales were written down and where they were written down, and also worked with the visual constraint that I'd been building. So I started looking at the Nights tales were written in around 1300 and around Baghdad, I believe. And I stumbled on this man named Al-Tusi, whose work was later picked up by Copernicus, 300 years later, was picked up by Copernicus to do what we all know as the Copernican revolution, where they figured out that the Earth went around the sun rather than the other way around. So I already had this page here about Copernicus. So I was super excited. I didn't mean to do this. All of a sudden, because of the drawing, I discovered something for myself that really tied into the work. So I spent a couple weeks trying to learn his astronomical calculations so I could understand them really well, and also try to figure out how to make the drawings all flow together and do the thing that I wanted to do. So it's this sort of massive process, all generated by my drawing, not generated by my outline or anything like that. So here it is. Here's the final page. So that lower left-hand corner, nothing in like what I set out to do when I started this project said you should research Arab astronomy in the 13th century. There's nothing about my project that asked me to do that. But everything about my drawing said you need something to solve the problems you've set up here. Where does this take you? And it took me to this place, and I'm really very grateful that I had to I had to learn these things for myself that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. I think that's really the key to this work. I think the key is it's not so much about the skill of drawing, it's about what drawing can teach you and what working visually and other modes can teach you. So I want to wrap with a picture, a little segment from one of my students. I teach this class, or I have taught comics as a way of thinking. And this is a student, she was very shy, and I think you would not describe her like, she's not trained in drawing at all. But I'm just going to show you a little tiny excerpt where you can kind of see her thinking. It's a very personal discovery for her. So this is the setup, but just a little bit. Just see how it works. And so she's very much playing with the comics form itself, how the panel can be a box, how it can be something you fall into, how it can... so she's playing with that idea and just thinking about her identity. And then I'll go to the last page I have a sample of. This last one, I'll read this to you. So she makes her own box out of words, sounds, and pictures, and soon she learns that there is no need for borders, that boxes restrict her unnecessarily, since she can go anywhere she wishes. And I think for her, and this really is true of me, but I think it's maybe more interesting to see somebody who's not a trained drawer in the way that I am, to see how she could learn about her own thinking and work through her own thinking and discover things about herself and about her learning through working visually that I don't think she could have done in any other way. And this to me, sticks out as a really profound piece, just in terms of how much thinking went on. So I want the final words here to say, I think, for me, in bringing in the drawing and bringing in comics making alongside my scholarly work, it really opened the doors for me. It was rather than like trying to fit in pieces, I was like opened outward. And it really became this enjoyable, very difficult, but enjoyable journey of learning. And I think, as students, as professors there, as learners, as educators, we really want education to be not about like trying to get people to go down narrower and narrow paths. We want to help them figure out where they need to go, figure out how they can make their own discoveries. And I think encouraging people to bring in the modes that they already make sense to the world and have those count, I think that's what we really need to think about as education. So thank you. I'm done with the me talk a lot part. And I'm going to turn the screen off in a second, or turn the screen share off if I can. If I can, I may have to kill my computer because it's not helping me here. Stop sharing. Is that working yet or no? What do we got here? Can you... here you go. Hello. Hey, this is a much bigger room all of a sudden. So there you go. You want questions? It's hard to judge people when we're communicating across Skype. I can't, it's harder than being in person. All right. Oh, all right. I didn't know I'd have comics people in the room. Some hi. Nice. Cool. Go ahead. Wait, can you say just a little louder? Cool. About character design or about something else? Ev- Well, let me say I don't know how much you saw my work before the slideshow. I don't I I don't tell this is a non-narrative thing. There's no story, right? There's kind of characters, but they're not the same characters through the whole thing. So I may be the worst comics maker on earth to tell you about character stuff. Because each page I'm like trying to figure out a totally different thing. Um, I can recommend books, but I don't. You got what have you looked at? What sort of references do you look at? Yes, 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 yes. I know it. And she's very good at character design. She's amazing at that. Well, I mean, I don't think I can answer it great, but like, how much do you do life drawing? So you've studied life drawing, and I don't know any answer except to draw a ton. Just draw and draw and draw and draw and draw and draw in different situations and just keep going. I don't think there's a secret to it. I think there's some secrets maybe or some advice to be given about how to make a comic, which is different than character design is a very. Are you in illustration school or no? Yeah. But but I mean I assume there's classes on character design or no? No. Um, well, I'm gonna have to apologize to not. Uh, it stumped me on the first question. But I think, I mean, are you laying it out right now, the comic? Are you doing the layouts like little thumbnails and all that? Oh, you've storyboarded it already. So you know where you're going. That's good. I mean that to me, this is my experience is that I'm like more interested, and you saw a couple of my sketches in how all the pieces move. I mean, I also spend a lot of time drawing, but it's whereas I think something like Saga, it's her compositions are pretty straightforward, but her designs are everything. I mean she hardly even draws backgrounds. It's almost entirely on her actors. And I think you get your actors from drawing in life and having your friends sit there while you draw them doing this pose. I think one thing I really like, and then I'm going to stop on this question because I don't really know anything, um, is I mean there's a cartoonist. Let me see if it's on my desk. Do you guys know Linda Barry's work? Do you know Linda Barry, the cartoonist's work? Hold on one second. You see those things on my desk that I have to find. I took it home. I don't have Linda Barry's work, but she recommends. I don't not recommending this book for you because I think you want to draw comics that are very, very realistic looking. But what I like about it, he does this thing in his class where he has people draw Batman, let's say, just anything, but and you draw it in 3 minutes, and then you draw him again in 2 minutes, and then you draw him again in 1 minute, and then 30 seconds, then 15 seconds, and 5. And I feel like what you learn to do is what do you actually need to draw? Like how much detail what do you need to draw? And there's like a sweet spot for people. And so Saga's characters look pretty realistic, but I think there's not much to them. I mean, so I think that act of cartooning, like learning to, how much do I need to get your expression right now fast is what matters. And I suspect you're not going to draw minimalist cartoons. You are much more like Saga, right? Which is that needs lots of life drawing class, I think. Anyway, I'm going to stop because I don't really know anything about it. But I'd love to see your comic someday. I'll say it at that. Okay. What else? What else do you have for me? That's it? The only question I couldn't answer, that's what we're going to. Oh, hello, sir.
I consider that it has opened a really important discussion. I have two questions for you. The first one is related to the current state of that discussion.
Current state of what?
Of that discussion.
What's that? What's that word?
Discussion.
No, but there's a word before. Current state of what discussion?
Of that discussion.
Oh, just that. Oh, I thought it was a particular kind. Sorry. I just couldn't hear it very well.
Do you think that comic books have now a place in academic research? I mean,
Yes.
are they still just a form of literature that deserves some attention from scholars, or do they really are starting to be considered as a possible form of scientific thinking and of communicating results of serious research?
Yes. No, but so I don't know if you made that was way easier than the last one. But so here's so last fall I got hired by Nature, the science journal Nature. It's been around anyway, I got hired by them to do a piece on climate change for the Paris conference. So it's their first comic ever in their 150-year history or whatever. And it was distributed to delegates to the UN for the Paris talks. So I feel like people are sort of waking up to the fact that, yes, I mean, because we put together 25 years of climate talk history, the science, and it's a very short comic, but I think there's things you can do in comics more efficient. I mean, it's harder work on the maker, maybe, but there are ways to get information across more efficiently through the images and through juxtapositions and all the different affordances you can have in comics. So I think people are recognizing, I mean, obviously the fact I got to do my doctorate in this helps. The fact that, I think, one, people are accepting it. Harvard University Press accepts it, Nature accepts it, other kinds of, I'm not the only one who's done things like that. So that's number one. And two, I think if we look, and you're a comics professor, right? Or you use comics in your teaching? So there's more and more people doing what you're doing. There's comic studies as a thing. So I think we're starting to recognize how much the kinds of affordances comics offer that other medium don't. I mean, there's things like that. I mean, it's a very simple example of that guy walking backwards to get the fruit. But like, when you start to think about how can I present information or data in a way, what does that offer me that I couldn't do in text? And there are some pretty obvious things that it can do, and I think we're only just getting started to figure them out. Yes was probably the best answer, but I think it's here. I mean, and I think too, as educators, you got like the wave of multimodality, multimodal textbooks, Gunther Kress's work. Like people are realizing that like a textbook is a pretty ineffective thing, but a thing with images and comic books made for that, they're not. I think we've often used comics to make things easy, but I think comics can actually make things. I mean, the goal of my comics, at least, is not to make them easy. It's just to make them seem easy. But in fact, once you're in there, you're like locked in this world where there's all these things going on, and you actually learn a lot more than you expect. So I think that the emphasis on multimodal learning is going to really see more going on with comics, and I think it's just here. I mean, we've been talking about visual thinking for 100 years. Like, people have been writing papers. They've been writing papers about visual thinking for at least 100 years, and I feel like it's like in my work, I don't think I said anything new. I don't think I said one thing that's new. I only instead of talking about it, I did it in a visual form, and I think it's. We're just overdue for it. That's my thought. But I'll say one more thing. Sorry, now I'm getting carried. I should have just stuck to yes. But I think because there's a split between people who do the sciences or people who do, sort of social, whatever they do, and artists. I think because artists have been separate people and other people are not artists, I think that's really unhealthy, because it means people who are scientists or whatever are not trained or don't think they're capable of visual skills. And I think that's demonstrably false. Like I teach classes for non-drawers, and they can all make things very well. I think the nature of being human is that we're visual creatures, and we're not dogs. Dogs probably couldn't make comic books, for various reasons. But people are visual creatures, so we know a lot of things. So I think healing that barrier where artists are special people and other people aren't, I think that's part of how we get there. So I just happen to be this sort of lucky person who never quit drawing, but also really liked to be in school the ways that other people like to be in school. Okay, so you had a second question. That was a long answer. Sorry. Yeah. Absolutely. On that note, hold on one second. I don't know if you can see the book. Can you see it? Yeah, so I just shared, I really like this book, but I'll just tell you how the book starts. He's got this nightmare of a music teacher, and in the nightmare of the music teacher, like little kids, like they have to learn the notes, but they're not allowed to play. And when they get to high school, they're like allowed to learn a little bit of the theory, but they still aren't allowed to play. And in college, maybe they learn a little bit more and they get to like hold the instruments, but it's not until they get to grad school that they actually get to play music, because they have to learn the theory all the way. And then he has a second dream where it's about an art teacher, and it's the same thing. Like you learn colors, you learn about what the colors are, and then he stops and he says, mathematics so often is being taught as, you don't get the play side of it until you're very late on in your career in math. But in fact, math is very much, as you said, this creative, playful thing, and that's when you really own it. So I just really love this book, and it happens to be on my desk. Yeah, so
as you know, a lot of comic books are moving to electronic formats
yeah.
for their distribution. But do you consider that comic books are moving to electronic formats and techniques also in their creative process? Or are they still anchored to paper formats in this way? Because drawing is a very physical activity, and maybe this is one of the genres that are apparently linked to paper formats.
Yeah, that's it's such a complicated time. Like things are changing so rapidly. For me, I'll say, just on the digital presentation side of it, not the making side first, but like just at the time we're sort of embracing comics, like people are starting to be serious about them. All these digital things are coming at us, and I feel like comics might miss might be very short, because you're going to have things you can do on your phone where they flap their wings and they do all these motion things. So for me, I think comics as a static art form, as a thing that you can read at your own pace, and you're not, it's not like movies, it's not like animations. It's up to you to say how fast you're going to read it and how you're going to encounter it. And I think that's a really special thing. It's kind of weird to embrace this, like, the most mundane of things, but I think there's something to it. And I fear that, the digital things are just different. They're not, I don't want to say they're not good or anything. I just say they offer different affordances. And I think we learn what those are as well. In terms of making, which I think was part of your question too. So I work on paper. All my sketches, all my design work, all my figuring out what I'm going to do is on paper. And then mostly because I couldn't letter, I was sort of challenged in the lettering area. I work digitally. So my pages themselves, I draw in Photoshop. So I use a tablet, I draw on a tablet, but and I look at a screen, so I don't even draw on the drawing. I've had that question raised. It's my motions, it's my actions, so it's very much hand drawn. It's just the mediator is not a piece of paper; it's a piece of plastic. So it's very similar, but it is different. I don't know. I think you raise a really interesting question. There's part of me that wishes I just stayed on paper and may return to it, because I draw better on paper. I draw more quickly, and I can't correct myself as much. Whereas on digitally, I can rework it 10,000 times. So there's trade-offs here, and I don't, but technology has also been part of art forever. I mean, since we could make reproductions of any kind, which is as far back as like clay tablets. It's a really complicated question, I think. Is there more, is there another direction I should go, or is that helpful? Right. Yeah, I'd love to talk to you more about that question, so maybe another time we can. Thank you. Oh, I like this. It's all on you, apparently. Hi.
Le voy a hacer simplemente una pregunta aquí, dos preguntas muy simples. Una sobre el contexto intelectual donde se produce esta propuesta y otra respecto de las posibilidades de que aparezcan propuestas en otros medios, la música, ese tipo de propuestas. Entonces, como son preguntas muy sintéticas, si quieres directamente se la dices tú.
Ok, sí, la puedo ver. David,
Sí.
venga. Ok.
La primera es fundamentalmente sobre el contexto intelectual de la propuesta.
Christian wants to know what is the intellectual context. Where
Wants to know what?
the intellectual context where your work is presented, or where your work
Oh, you mean what field?
was born.
Lo que se llama los visual studies, ¿no? Los estudios visuales.
In visual studies.
Sorry, say that last word. In what?
Visual studies.
Oh, does it fit in visual studies? That's a tough question. So, and you can, if I'm answering wrong, you guys can tell me to answer again. So my doctorate is in interdisciplinary studies in education. So already that doesn't mean anything, right? Like what it means. So my training is in like education broadly. My background is in mathematics. My life is trained in drawing on my own. In terms of like where this gets shelved in a bookstore, sometimes it's in philosophy. I mean, I think of it as philosophy. That's what I think I'm a philosopher, but it's not philosophy. I'm not spending a lot of time with, Plato. I mean, it's mentioned, but I'm not spending time with Plato or Kant or any of those people. I'm not that kind of philosopher. So I think it interlaps with visual studies, yes. It interacts or intersects with comic studies. It intersects with education for sure, philosophy of education. Perception, I spent a ton of time on perception work. And then within any page, any one page, I may go into physics, I may go into mathematics. It's very much, it's hard to define. And I feel like my own career is hard to define. Like I've taught in an education department, an illustration department, an English department, and I'm here now in a humanities interdisciplinary studies department, which has no meaning again. It's like people who don't fit. So, I mean, I think part of my own argument in the work is that I think the boxes are maybe helpful, but also restrictive. Like it's good that we have mathematics, but that it's good that we have an area where we study mathematics, but that it can be a box of exclusion. Also, I think is not healthy. So I think part of this book is written to justify my own existence as somebody who doesn't know what box he fits in. Is that sort of? Yeah, there's no good answer.
The other question is about the other possibilities of the new medias, video games, internet, about the construction of knowledge. The other possibilities.
Wait, no.
Sí, las mismas, es decir, ¿cuáles son las posibilidades
you see other possibilities to learn
Yeah,
in other mass media.
yeah. No, that's what I thought. I just didn't know where we're. Yeah. Yeah. No, I understood. I just didn't know. Yeah, I understood before. I mean, I think. I mean, here's the thing about comics. Comics are a little bit of a cheat because there's still words in it, so it's still close enough to things people recognize that I think it was fairly easy for me to get through. You know, whereas things like if I was a dancer, which I'm not, but if I was like a performative dancer, I think it would be harder to justify, right? Because I wouldn't have the like words built in. So I think people would have struggled. I'm not, if because now I'm in the role where I get to have I get to be an advisee. I'm curious about myself. If I got somebody who said, I'm going to do performative dance and that's going to be my work, can we find a way to do it? And I'd like to think that the answer is yes. I don't know what that looks like because I don't know anything about the affordances of dance, or I don't know. But I mean, I certainly I've been on lots of panels or at talks where people are doing digital work where there's hypertext and there's all these other things. So I think that's a pretty obvious one that should happen if it hasn't already, and video ones have happened. Um, to me, I think that the goal of us as educators is to figure out how to use the most of a person. So if the ways you think best don't fit into what we've normally thought of as education, why not use them? And maybe in the case of performative dance, you still need to have text to go with it because you need that sort of translation to other people. But I think if the way you figure out the world is through moving, and I think everybody does that to a fairly large degree, but maybe we can't articulate it. I think we want to explore how that can be used more. Is that at all a useful answer? Giving me too serious a look. I can't tell. I mean, why? I mean, text is very efficient, obviously. Text is a very efficient way to communicate, and I'm not anti-text, but I feel like in my case, I can do things with comics that I can't do with text, And I don't think everybody in the world should make comics dissertations at all. I think everybody in the world should learn that they're visual and that use that however they use it. And I think the students I've had, a few of them will keep making comics, but I hope most of them know that they can work through their thinking visually. And that, to me, is the biggest thing. What the end form is, I think it depends on what your objective is. And there's some forms that's probably best to be all in text, and that's beautiful. Is that at all adequate? I can't read your expression. I don't know. But I'm going to be saved. She's got a question for me in the back. I can hear that you're talking, but I don't know if I'm going to hear the words.
Okay.
I see you. Hi.
Okay, I have two questions.
Okay.
Well, I think there are two main misconceptions about comics. One of them is that...
Did you say misconception?
Misconceptions.
Yeah.
Yeah, misunderstandings.
Yes. No, I get it. I just could.
About comics. One is that it simplifies thought.
Yes.
And I think you made your point very clearly that it doesn't. I mean, it has plenty of room for complex thinking. The second of them is that it only serves dissemination of thought and not actual research. So, and I don't think you talked too much about that. Do you think that it also serves actual scholarly research? So that would be my first question. And then the second one has to do with
Yeah, that's great question. Can you just clarify the first? I heard it all, but I don't think I quite understood the first one. The second one I understood well.
If you think that comics are not only a good tool for
Presenting.
dissemination
Right.
of ideas, but also for research, like what we actually
Yeah.
have tools towards in the university.
I think so. I mean, I think, and it depends on the kind of research you do, because there's so many. I mean, let's say qualitative research, right? You're observing classroom, or you're observing an ethnographic situation. So there's a big rise of comics to sort of ethnography and sociology. So the act of, like, doing your observations visually, and there's a number of people who do this, and they don't often stay visual. They maybe turn it all into text in the end. So I think, sort of live or encoding your notes through drawing, or, observing, I think there's a lot to be done there. And I think this is not the kind of work I do, because I don't do, I do all sort of philosophizing without live things. But I think in the live situations, there's a lot of things you'll notice drawing that you won't notice recording it on audio, say. I mean, that's just a tiny example. But I think it's obvious. I think that's definitely true. And I think for me, like the Scheherazade example that I gave here, like, I mean, it really only would have happened because I was drawing. There's no, I mean, and it's not a discovery in the sort of research sense, like I found something new. It's only a discovery in terms of learning from me and making connections that are new. But I think absolutely. I think absolutely. So let me just give one more sort of side tale. And there's a field called graphic medicine, and that's people dealing with illness or health narratives, either doctors or patients or patient activists. And it's getting people to make, either professionals that make comics about these situations, or it's the people themselves learning to make comics to, like, wrestle through the issues and to try to work through it in a different form. And one of the leaders of this, she's a professor at Penn State. She said this thing, and it really stuck with me, that every graduate student ought to have a class in making comics. And not because, again, not because they're going to become professional artists in that way, but because it's a different way to record ideas and to record data and to record information. And I think that could be really useful. And I think you're totally right. We've mostly looked at presenting ideas in comics and not very much at how we think, how we create ideas in comics. I think that's the other side of it that's less represented, but I think very available. And I think the more we sort of get people immersed in working visually from day one, the more that, so like, you do data visualization at all in your work, or you know what it is? Of course. Or maybe not the word, but, like data visualization, like infographics or charts, or, just things that ways to keep track of data visually. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, like, that's a way to look at the world through, you see things in the visual that you may not if you just had a list of data, like, because it makes it visible. And I feel like, to me, I actually just taught some stuff on data visualization, which I don't know a lot about. But I feel like it is very similar in the ways using images and text in data visualization. You can see things that you wouldn't, that you also in comics using using images and text, you can see things that you wouldn't see otherwise. And I know the example of my student is a little bit, it's a very personal story, but I think I think she would discover the same things if she was on the ground researching things. And I think too, if we think about the sciences, I mean, physics people have been drawing forever. I mean, I think you see a high amount of drawers in some areas of sciences because that's ways they think through problems. So I don't know, maybe that's not a good answer, but it's a lot of me.
No, thank you for that. It is a good answer.
All right, so number two, yeah, it takes more time. There's no way around that. It takes more time. But yes and no. I mean, I happen to have on my desk things I have on my desk. This is called the Sketchnote Handbook, which is about, instead of taking notes like just writing, it's people who, let's see if I can find it one quick. this isn't a great one to see because it's hard to see, but it's like people who draw a little bit and it's, I get my students to do this. And I think one of the most interesting things about it is I had one student who I made her do it in another class, and she said, I hated it. She's just like, I hated doing it. And then she said, but after class, somebody asked me we did in class, and she said, I remembered everything. So it was this really interesting, like, skepticism, and then, like, it worked. And so the emphasis on stuff like this is not on good drawing, but on getting ideas down. So maybe it's faster to write the word tree, or maybe it's quicker to draw, depending on the thing. That using visuals not to make art so much as to get ideas down, I think is really important. And I think comics, I draw in a way that is incredibly, like, time-consuming, dense drawing, so that's the way I like to make comics. But I think to go back to that very first question where I said drawing Batman in 3 minutes down to 15 seconds or 5 seconds, like, when you do this a little bit, is your 30-second drawing of the thing you're observing or the thing you're thinking about sufficient? And maybe it is. It probably is, because, if I want to capture something about the thing I want to do, 3 minutes might be too long. I might spend too long, like, because I don't know enough about it. But in 30 seconds, I might capture exactly the thing that I really care about. So I think doing it is the first thing. I have on my website, I do this exercise in talks like this usually when I'm there, where I get people drawing very quickly and thinking about space very quickly and thinking about how much they know about drawing without any training. And I find people they know so much, and they don't realize how much they know. But you have to be open to it, and you have to sort of dive in. In terms of books, like specific references, I'm kind of tempted to have us do this exercise, but I don't have a lot of time left here, so it's a toss. But I might leave you with that. I may leave if you want. But in terms of books, I think, there's Scott McCloud's book, which is very formal. I think Linda, this is not she has a book about her class. This is Linda Berry, longtime cartoonist. Can you see, this one's called Picture This by Linda Berry. But she's got a book called Syllabus about her comics class for non-comics makers. And I think one of the biggest things she asks in the class, or in her work, and it's in all the books that she's done recently, is like, why do we draw? And then why do we stop drawing? And in very much, she talks about the fact that there was this fear of getting it right that stops us. And she talks about, why is a bad drawing bad? And it's not that she says there's no such thing as a bad, whether it's a bad drawing or not, it's still a drawing. It's still a way of you finding a way to draw. It's still a way of you taking something here and making it physical, making it visual. So I think that, to me, I could send you a list of things if you want. I'm happy to. On both of your questions, I'm happy to. But yeah, you're totally right. It takes more time. There's no getting around that. But I also think that there is things you don't need to say so much. And there's things, and in terms of getting, I think of how I teach people, I teach non-comics makers mostly how to make comics. I think that they tend to teach themselves. You set up situations for you to think through problems, and they start developing their own vocabulary of how they want to draw, of how they want to make marks. And I think we all have that in us. So it's sort of trusting it a little more rather than, you're not going to draw like I draw. And you're not going to draw like whoever your favorite artist is, or, maybe the girls over there are going to draw like Saga because that's going to be they're going to devote their life to learning how to draw. And that's one thing. But I don't think any of that matters. I think whether you draw a way I draw, or Saga, and she's amazing, or this guy, I don't know if you can see this, but he's they're little geometric bodies and round heads, and this guy's he draws covers for the New Yorker. This is it. You can, this is a way he draws. And so, is that wrong? Is that bad? It's just, there's this range of ways that what drawing means, and I think we need to sort of open that up, rather than it's Fiona Staples of Saga draws this like very particular way. That student, that work that I showed, I like to show it because she doesn't draw anything like I do, but I think it's like one of the most profound things I've ever seen. So, I don't know. That's a much longer conversation. Do we have one more like urgent question, or I might leave you with a drawing activity and then I have to go?
Yes. Well, I wanted to ask. For us, we are researchers and we are working most of the time with text. But as a teacher, as Aurelia was telling you, you work with people that is used or more used to visual.
No, I don't actually. I don't work with people. I work with, I was in an English department. None of these people draw.
Okay.
So I don't. That student I show, and I have people who, but I actually don't work with drawers.
Yeah. No, I think your job is very, very interesting because you try to expand the visual with the text, and I think that for people that work with text, as we researchers do most, well, I'm from literature, so
Right.
I don't draw, but I write a lot. But
Yes.
I think it's very, very important now, your work, because are expanding the ways of thinking with visual things that needs for teaching, for example, for, as you said, for our education system. There are other ways to say things, other ways to understand, other ways to see the complex process of thinking. I mean,
Yeah.
I was thinking when I see your work about poetry, I read a lot of poetry, and metaphors are very, very difficult to
Yeah.
translate. And I think that is just, I think you are doing really, really well. And I think I admire your work for that, because you are translating complex thought
Yeah.
in a visual thing. I think that could be a challenge for our system of education, as you were saying, also maybe for American system of education.
Absolutely, American
So
system.
it's also for Mexican system of education, or our education system is very, very important to rethink their ways of learning and teaching, no? And that's, I think your work is like a really important point of discussion.
Thanks.
It's not a question, but it was.
No, I appreciate it. But I think, I'm not going to, just so I don't leave it on that, because that's very nice. But I feel like, I said to the earlier question that, we've known about visual thinking for 100 years, people have been writing about it. And I feel like I read an article about play, the importance of play, like once a week. Like, people, kids who learn through play-based versus rote-based, the play-based ones all do better. And at least here, at the end of the day, when the people who devise the system of education, they always throw out play. They always discount it. So you can, study after study will show that it does better and is healthier, and we still forget it. So I don't know, I don't know how many sort of like times you have to punch the system to say you need to open it up. But I think we just have to keep going. Yeah.
Keep doing things and to keep asking the system to expand their.
Yeah, and they're hard too. To the question just before you, it's both harder to do it. Not that writing is very hard. Writing is incredibly hard, but we're sort of expected to, so it's a little different. But drawing is harder in some levels, but it's also assessing it is harder. We have rules of grammar, we have rules of content, but I think in the same way that assessing a poem is I think comics have more in common with poetry than other forms, because it's all about space and it's all about how you experience these things and make a feeling, and make metaphor, all those things. I think comics and poetry share a lot, and but it's hard to assess poetry. I think assume it is. If it doesn't, whatever. And it's very hard to assess visual things and very easy to do other things. Anyway, sorry. I should have let you quit. That was better. Maybe I'll Oh.
Last question. Maybe.
Oh, we have one last question. All right, then I have to run to my next class.
In that way, I only want to know if you consider your work like an underground work.
Would I consider mine underground?
Your work,
No. You mean like my style or
your
my?
style, because you have your own interpretation of the work, or maybe you don't use the usual system to produce your idea, your work, your comics.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, my visual I mean, I'm not sure I quite know what you mean. My visual influences, like I grew up on superhero comics, so I kind of draw that way. So visually, I mean, I draw in black and white, which undergrounds did. I'm not sure. I don't. I mean, it's certainly the alternative within education, within the academy. It's certainly, it's different than other comics. There are more educational comics, but this is a different kind of creature. But I don't. But at least as I understand underground, that feels to me like something that people. I don't know how to answer that. Sorry. Either I'm misunderstanding how we're using that word, or I'm missing something.
I guess the proposal of William Blake or Burroughs or maybe that kind of the underground.
Do you think of Blake as underground? Is that?
Yes,
Oh.
yes, I guess
I-
it's the beginning of the underground
Oh, that's really interesting.
because
Well,
it's the beginning when you can have your own interpretation.
I see what you mean. Yeah, I mean, I guess my definition of underground comics is so limited to the like 1960s drug and I don't even swear in my comics. But I think I understand better what you mean. I like being, I mean, if you I like thinking about it in the way you're saying it, I like that. I don't know that I've thought about it enough.
Okay.
But
No,
I,
I just know you have the connection that I now see you don't. No?
no, well, that's awesome. Thank you. I like it.
Well,
And I feel, Mariana, I feel like that I'm doing some workshops on this, and I feel like at least for a few of you that want to do this in research, I may try to make some materials available, or we'll talk again sometime. But because I now have like all these things I want to talk to you about, but I have to go, and you probably have to go. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, no, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your talk.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we can continue talking.
Yeah, continue. Thank you. All right. Thank you. I'm gonna run to class because I'm running today. So
Okay.
we'll talk again soon, I hope.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Que lo dejaste conmigo era para que le dieran el